The smell hit her first. Wet concrete and motor oil, the perfume of an alley that had swallowed 1,000 bad nights and never once apologized for any of them. Evelyn had walked this shortcut for 3 years, past the dumpsters behind Hangang Tower, past the flickering service light that the landlord kept promising to fix, and tonight, like every night, the city felt like it was breathing down her neck. She didn't hear Marcus until his hand closed around her collar. There she is. He materialized from the shadow between 2 rusted rollaway bins, a mountain of entitlement packed into a leather jacket that still smelled like her old apartment. 6'2" of I thought I made myself clear, blocking the mouth of the alley with the casual confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anything that mattered. Evelyn didn't run. Running taught men like Marcus that they were worth the energy. "I'm going home," she said flatly. "Our home." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. "You walked out of our place with a garbage bag and your mother's rosary and thought that was that." She tasted copper before she even registered that he'd moved, the sharp, metallic bloom spreading across her tongue as the back of her head met the brick wall. Her vision stuttered. The alley tilted sideways. Above her, the city's glow made a halo out of the smog, soul painting itself beautiful and indifferent on the other side of this moment. Marcus leaned in close enough that she could count the contempt in his expression. "I own you, Evelyn." His voice dropped to something almost tender. That was the part that had always frightened her most, the tenderness. "You don't get to leave until I say you leave." Her ribs screamed. Her pride screamed louder. She spit blood onto the ground between them. A universe away, and yet only 40 meters, separated by 1 fire door, 1 freight elevator, and the entire distance between a woman surviving and a man ruling, Saiwoo Park sat at his table. Hangang Tower's private dining room breathed in low gold light and the muted symphony of a room where money moved so quietly it barely made a sound. White linen. Crystal that caught the chandelier. A city skyline spread 40 floors below like something he'd personally arranged and simply hadn't bothered to admire yet. The man across from him was talking about import routes, profit margins, a shipment delayed in Busan, words Saiwoo was still processing despite no longer hearing them. Because on the small security monitor inlaid discreetly into the far wall, the one his head of security, Jay, had wired to cover every entrance, alley, and blind spot within a 3-block radius of his establishment, Saiwoo had seen a white shoat. And then he had seen the blood. His jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree. The only tell he allowed himself. The man across the table was still talking. Saiwoo lifted 2 fingers from the tablecloth, a gesture so small it would have looked like nothing to anyone watching, and Jay materialized at his shoulder like a verdict that had already been handed down. Saiwoo did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He did not take his eyes off the monitor. "Get her. Now." Jay moved. His 2 men moved with him, black suits, cropped hair, faces that had stopped registering emotion somewhere around their 2nd year in Saiwoo's service. They moved the way water moves through a crack in stone, inevitable, silent, and completely unstoppable once it had begun. Evelyn heard the door before she saw them. A service exit swinging open. Footsteps that did not hurry because they had never needed to hurry. And then, crack, a sound like green wood splitting, sharp and final and clinical, and Marcus was no longer upright. She didn't watch what happened next. She looked at the sky instead, at the smog-haloed skyline, and focused on breathing through the pain blooming across her ribs. When a hand reached down toward her, it was not one of the suits. It was Jay, quiet, watchful, extending an open palm with the careful neutrality of a man who had been given very specific instructions. "Ms. Evelyn." His voice was even. Almost gentle. "He's asked to see you." She didn't need clarification. She knew, with the specific dread of a woman who had once loved a boy with ink-stained fingers and equations sketched on napkin margins, exactly who he was. She looked at the hand. She looked at the blood on her shirt. She thought about her mother, Amina, 3 floors up in a medical facility that had already sent 2 collection notices this month. Evelyn straightened her spine, slowly, because her ribs objected to the ambition, and stood without the offered hand. "Lead the way," she said, as if this had been her idea. The dining room went quiet when she walked in. Not dramatically. The music continued. Cutlery still moved. But eyes moved the way eyes always moved when something unexpected entered a room built to be controlled. with the careful, sideways attention of people who knew better than to stare at anything Saiwoo Park was directly involved in. He was still seated. Still composed. The man across the table from him had apparently concluded his business. Because he was gone, his chair pushed back at a respectful distance. Saiwoo's hand rested flat on the white tablecloth, the hand with the watch, the ink creeping from his collar, the gold chain catching the chandelier light like something that had decided to be beautiful through sheer force of will. He was looking at her the way he looked at everything, like he had already calculated 4 possible outcomes and was simply waiting to see which one she chose. Evelyn stopped 3 feet from his table. He stood. And in the space of that movement, unhurried, certain, a man rising because he chose to, not because protocol required it, she saw the boy from her past folded somewhere inside this architecture of silk and shadow and controlled fury. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I'm fine standing." Something moved in his expression. Not softened. Just noted. "You have a broken rib." He said it the way people state longitude. "Possibly 2. There is a doctor on the 14th floor. Jay will take you." His eyes dropped, just briefly, to the blood on her shirt, and when they returned to her face there was something in them that was not quite calm and not quite anger and sat precisely in the space between. "You will tell me, when you are ready, who he is." "I know who he is." "Then you know," Saiwoo said, "that I already do too." The city burned gold and silver 40 floors below them, indifferent and enormous. Somewhere upstairs, her mother's oxygen machine would be cycling through its quiet rhythm. And in this room, at this table, in this particular silence, Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath a decision she hadn't yet admitted she was making. She pulled out the chair. She sat down. The monitor was small, 8 inches of reinforced glass set flush into the mahogany panel beside the kitchen corridor, the kind of detail that guests never noticed and Saiwoo never stopped watching. It cycled through 12 feeds every 4 to 5 seconds. The alley behind the restaurant service entrance appeared on rotation at 11:17 p.m., and Saiwoo's jaw tightened by 1 degree when he saw the white shirt. Then he saw the hand that had grabbed it. The man was broad across the shoulders, the kind of broad that came from anger carried for years in the body. He had Evelyn pinned against the brick with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before, who had, in fact, built his entire sense of self around the doing of it. Saiwoo watched the man's fist twist the fabric of her collar. Watched her head snap sideways. Watched her spit something dark onto the concrete. Across the table, his associate from Chicago was still talking about the Busan shipment. Saiwoo heard none of it. He had a particular relationship with stillness, had cultivated it over 15 years of building a kingdom in rooms where showing feeling was the same as showing throat. He could sit through negotiations that lasted 9 hours without his expression shifting by a single degree. He had once listened to a man threaten everything he'd built and responded by refilling the man's glass of water. But his jaw was ticking now. A small, involuntary movement in the muscle below his ear, the one tell he had never fully trained out of himself, because some things lived deeper than discipline. He knew that woman's walk before he'd seen her face. He had known it 15 years and 1 demolished life ago, when she used to walk toward him across a university courtyard with her chin at that particular angle. The one that said, "I have decided something and you will not talk me out of it." Jay materialized at his shoulder without being summoned. That was what made Jay invaluable. Saiwoo lifted 2 fingers from the tablecloth. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "Get her now." Jay was already moving before the sentence finished. His 2 men peeled from their positions along the wall. Black suits, cropped hair, faces that had graduated long ago from expression to function, and they moved through the kitchen corridor with the silent, hydraulic certainty of men who understood that hesitation was just a slower way of failing. The service door opened without drama. The alley received them. Evelyn heard the footsteps and had just enough time to register that they were not Marcus's footsteps, too measured, too quiet, too purposeful, before the night rearranged itself with violent efficiency. There was a sound like green wood splitting, a wet crack that bounced off the brick walls and then died, and Marcus was no longer standing. He was on the ground, making a sound that was not quite a word, cradling his arm against his chest. One of the suits crouched briefly, said something low, rose. Then Jay was in front of her, watchful, neutral, extending an open palm with the careful precision of a man following exact instructions. "Ms. Evelyn." His voice held no inflection. "Has asked to see you." She looked at the hand. She looked at the blood she could feel drying on her chin. She looked past Jay at the city that had watched this happen and kept right on glowing, indifferent and enormous, the way American cities always did. She thought about her mother upstairs in that facility. The collection notices on the kitchen table. The second notice that had arrived Tuesday in an envelope she hadn't opened because she already knew what it said. She did not take Jay's hand. She straightened her spine, slowly, because her ribs filed a formal complaint about the ambition, and she walked past him toward the service entrance. "Lead the way," she said, as if any of this had been her idea. The dining room was everything the alley wasn't: gold light, white linen, crystal catching the chandelier like it had nowhere better to be. The city of Chicago spread itself 40 floors below the window glass in amber and silver, a skyline performing its nightly theater for anyone wealthy enough to have a table this high. The music was low. The other guests had the careful, sideways awareness of people who understood that looking directly at certain things was a form of bad manners. Saiwoo was standing when she walked in. Not because protocol required it. He had simply stood, the way a man stands when something he thought he'd filed away permanently walks back through a door he forgot he left unlocked. Evelyn stopped. The distance between them was 12 feet and approximately a decade and a half of separate catastrophes, and she felt every inch of it. She had prepared herself, in the 30 seconds between the alley and this room, for a stranger. For the cold architecture of a man she'd heard about in careful whispers: Saiwoo Park, don't say his name wrong, don't look at his people wrong, a man built from rumor and consequence. She had not prepared for his face to still carry the geometry of the boy she'd known. He was different, obviously. The silk shirt. The gold chain resting against the tattoos that climbed his throat like a map of every year she hadn't been there for. The watch. The posture of a man who had long since stopped wondering whether he owned the room, because owning rooms had become automatic, like breathing. The sharp, commanding cut of his jaw. But underneath all of it, in the particular way he held himself very still, the way he looked at her like he was calculating, and also, just beneath that calculation, feeling, she saw the boy from the university library who used to sketch differential equations on the margins of his notebooks because he thought math was beautiful. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I'm fine standing." Something in his expression noted this without changing. He glanced at Jay, who stepped away without a word. "You have a broken rib," Saiwoo said. "Possibly two. There is a doctor on the 14th floor." "I didn't ask for a doctor." "No," he agreed. "You didn't ask for any of this." He looked at her shirt, at the crimson that had spread across the white linen of it like something that had decided to be permanent, and when his eyes returned to her face, they held something that sat precisely in the territory between fury and grief, a country she didn't have a name for. "But here you are." She sat down. He sat across from her. The city burned gold below them. A server appeared with water and disappeared again with the invisible competence that costs a great deal of money to maintain. "I have a proposal," Saiwoo said. She almost laughed. "Of course you do." The 32nd floor of the Meridian. A secured apartment. 2 of my people in the building at all times. He laid it out like a schematic, clean and precise. Your mother's facility bills, settled. Her care, upgraded to the specialist unit on the 9th floor, the one she was denied for financial reasons 3 months ago. He had done his research. The specificity of it landed on her chest like a stone. In exchange, you stop walking home alone through alleys at 11 o'clock at night. You let me ensure that the man who just put his hands on you cannot do so again. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "And what do you get?" she asked. Saiwoo looked at her steadily. "The knowledge that I didn't look away from a monitor and do nothing." He paused. "I am very tired of doing nothing." She thought about her mother. She thought about the collection notices. She thought about Marcus's hand on her collar and the way he'd said "I own you" with that horrible, almost tender certainty. "I'm not staying in your house," she said. "I'm not your—" "You are not anything," Saiwoo said quietly. "You are a woman who needs a safe place and a mother who needs medical care. I am a man who can provide both. That is all this is required to be." Outside, Chicago kept performing its nightly theater, unaware and unconcerned. Evelyn looked at the city for a long moment. Then she looked back at the man across the table, this stranger who still had the boy's eyes, and made the decision she'd already made in the alley. in the moment she chose not to take Jay's hand, in the moment she straightened her spine. "All right," she said. "Show me this apartment." The 32nd floor smelled like new construction and expensive air. The apartment was floor-to-ceiling glass on the north and west walls, a kitchen that appeared to have been designed by someone who took countertops personally, and a silence so complete it felt architectural. Evelyn stood at the window the first night with her bandaged ribs and her replaced shirt. Jay had produced both within the hour, the medical attention and the clean clothing, with the same neutral efficiency he applied to everything, and looked at the city and felt, for the first time in 4 years, that nothing could reach her. She hated that it was his doing. She hated that she was grateful. Saiwoo himself was almost never there. That was the first thing she learned about her new life. The apartment was not his home, it was simply his infrastructure, a floor of his building that he had repurposed with the casual authority of a man for whom repurposing things was a reflex. He did not visit. He did not check in with anything that resembled personal interest. Groceries appeared in the refrigerator on Tuesdays, the exact groceries she would have chosen, which was somehow worse than if he'd gotten them wrong. The specialist at her mother's facility called to inform her that the financial hold had been released and that Amina's new treatment plan would begin Monday. Bills that had lived like bad weather on her kitchen table for 2 years simply ceased to arrive. Saiwoo was a ghost who left evidence of himself everywhere and his actual presence nowhere. She would go 3 days without seeing him. Then 5. She learned his schedule the way you learn a weather pattern, from the secondary effects, not from the thing itself. When Jay appeared in the lobby at 6 in the morning, Saiwoo was in the building. When the black car was absent from the parking structure, he was not. She told herself she was cataloging his patterns for practical reasons. She almost believed it. She spent her mornings at the facility with her mother. Amina had been moved to a room with a window that caught the afternoon light, and the new specialist had already adjusted her medication in ways that were producing results the previous facility had called unlikely. Her mother sat up straighter now. She asked questions about the food. She noticed the light. Evelyn sat beside her bed and held her hand and felt the specific, complicated emotion of watching someone you love come back to themselves, and tried not to think about who had made it possible. She came to the facility on a Thursday afternoon and found Saiwoo already there. He was seated in the chair beside Amina's bed, her chair, the one Evelyn had begun to think of as hers, with his jacket folded across his knee and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the tattoos on his forearms visible and his posture entirely absent of the authority he wore everywhere else. He was holding something. An orchid in a small clay pot, white-petaled, the kind of thing that required patience and specific attention to keep alive. He was listening to her mother tell a story about Lagos in 1987. Amina was laughing. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment that stretched longer than she intended, watching a man who controlled half the underground economy of the Chicago corridor sit in a fluorescent-lit hospital room and laugh at her mother's story about a mango vendor and a broken bicycle, and she felt something inside her chest shift in a way that frightened her considerably more than Marcus ever had. She walked in. Saiwoo stood immediately, that same unhurried rising, that same deliberate choice of movement. "I brought her a plant," he said. "She mentioned she used to keep orchids." "She did," Evelyn said, because it was true and because it was the only thing she could locate inside the sudden complicated weather of her chest. Amina looked between them with the serene, knowing expression of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize a story in progress when she saw one. She said nothing. She just smiled and patted the arm of her chair and asked Saiwoo to finish telling her about Seoul, and he sat back down, and Evelyn pulled a second chair from the corner and sat in it, and for 4 to 5 minutes they existed in that small, ordinary room as if it were the most natural arrangement in the world. The call started in the 5th week. The first one came at 2 a.m., her phone vibrating against the nightstand in the dark. She picked up because she thought it might be the facility. There was no voice. Just breathing, labored, deliberate, the specific rhythm of a man who wanted her to know he was there, wanted her to know he'd found the number. She hung up. The second call came the next night. Then 3 nights later. Then 2 nights after that, the interval shortening like something tightening. She didn't tell Saiwoo. She was cataloging the reasons she hadn't. It wasn't his problem, she was handling it. She refused to be a woman who ran to a man every time something frightened her, and she was aware that all of those reasons sat on top of a simpler one, which was that telling him would mean admitting that Marcus frightened her, and she had spent 4 years refusing to admit that. Then she found the bird. It was on the windowsill of the 32nd floor. A sparrow, small and brown, left with a precision that could not have been accidental. The building was secured. Jay swept the floors. The window had not been opened. She stood in front of it for a very long time, her coffee going cold in her hand, and understood that this was a message composed in a language that did not require translation. I can reach you wherever you are. I can reach anything small that you care about. She told Saiwoo that evening. He listened. He did not interrupt. His hands, resting on the table between them, were very still, the particular stillness of something making a decision that has already, beneath the surface, been made. I should have told you sooner, she said. Yes, he agreed, without inflection. Then, after a pause that had weight to it, may I tell you something? She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she was beginning to learn meant he was reaching for something he did not often reach for. His jaw moved. His eyes dropped briefly to his own hands. I had a sister, he said. Her name was Siyun. She was 23. He said it the way people say things they have said to themselves 10,000 times in private and almost never aloud. There was a man who decided she belonged to him. I was building something, he made a small gesture that encompassed, without drama, everything he owned, and I believed that the building was the same as protecting her. That if I created enough power, enough infrastructure, it would extend to the people he stopped. His jaw tightened by 1 degree. I was wrong. She needed walls and I gave her promises instead. Evelyn was very still. She didn't survive the year, he said. Simply. The way you say something simple when the complicated version would undo you. The city was quiet outside. The building breathed its expensive air around them. The walls, Saiwoo said, are not a cage. I need you to understand that. They are what I should have built for her and didn't. That is all they are. Evelyn looked at his hands on the table, the tattoos, the watch, the hands of a man who had built a kingdom out of grief and called it power, and she felt the anger she had been carrying since the alley, the pride she'd been using as armor, shift very slightly on its foundation. I understand, she said. She did not move toward him. Not yet. But the distance between them had changed its nature, and they both knew it. The attack came on a Saturday morning, which was somehow the most offensive part of it, the specific violation of a Saturday, when Amina had asked Evelyn to come for breakfast, when the city was slow and gold with early light, when things were supposed to be ordinary. Evelyn was in the elevator when the building's alarm system triggered, not the fire protocol, the other one, the alert Jay had shown her in the first week and told her, quietly and without dramatics, she would hopefully never hear. She heard it. The elevator stopped between floors 14 and 15. The lights shifted to emergency amber. Her phone was already ringing. Jay's voice was calm in a way that was itself a kind of information. Stay in the elevator. Do not open the doors regardless of what you hear. He is on his way. What's happening? 3 men through the service entrance. Ground floor. A pause, during which she heard something in the background that she chose not to think about too carefully. Past tense now. Stay in the elevator, Ms. Evelyn. The line didn't go dead, exactly. It just got very quiet. She pressed her back against the elevator wall and breathed. Her ribs had healed by now. The specialist on 14 had confirmed it 3 weeks ago, but she felt the ghost of them, the memory of pain her body hadn't entirely agreed to release. She thought about the bird on the windowsill. She thought about Marcus's voice on the phone at 2 a.m., the breathing, the deliberate terrible patience of it. She thought about Saiwoo's hands on the table. They are not a cage. The elevator resumed moving 13 minutes later. The doors opened on 32 to reveal Jay, slightly disheveled in a way that she had never seen before and that communicated, without a single word, that the men who had come through the service entrance had encountered something they had severely miscalculated. It's clear, he said. Marcus. Detained. Jay's expression offered no further elaboration, but his use of the word detained had a particular finality to it that she decided not to examine too closely. She was sitting on the kitchen counter, her hands wrapped around a glass of water, when she heard the apartment door. Not Jay's knock. A different sound, the specific sound of someone who has a key but is choosing to knock anyway. Saiwoo came in still wearing his coat, his collar open, something in his eyes that was not the controlled architecture she'd grown accustomed to. He had driven here fast. She could tell. He crossed the room without speaking and stopped in front of her, and for a moment he simply looked at her, cataloguing, checking, doing the rapid-fire accounting of a man who had driven through Saturday morning traffic running a specific calculation. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "Jay told me." "Then why do you look like that?" His jaw worked. The tell. The one he couldn't train out. "Because Jay telling me is not the same as seeing." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had built walls out of a grief he'd been carrying for years, who sat with her mother and listened to stories about Lagos, who sent orchids and settled debts and turned a ghost of himself into a fortress around her without ever asking for anything she hadn't agreed to give, who had driven here fast on a Saturday morning because hearing she was fine wasn't enough. She set down the glass. She didn't think about the distance. She didn't measure it this time. She reached out and took his hand, the one with the watch, the one that had pointed across the restaurant the night this all began, and she held it, and he held hers back with a steadiness that had nothing in it of performance and everything in it of someone who had been waiting a very long time to have something solid to hold. "He's not going to call again," she said. "No," Saiwoo agreed. "He's not." Outside, Chicago was golden and slow, a Saturday doing nothing more complicated than being a Saturday. Her mother was across town in a room with good light, getting better. The bird on the windowsill was the last message Marcus would ever send, though neither of them knew yet exactly how permanent last was going to turn out to be. She did know one thing, holding this man's hand in a glass tower 32 floors above the city, feeling the truth of it settle into the complicated architecture of everything she'd survived. The cage had never been a cage. It had been waiting to become something else all along. 6 months later, there was a house. Not a tower. Not 40 floors of secured infrastructure and ambient silence and groceries that appeared like proof of a ghost. A house, 2 stories, a back garden that had been badly neglected by the previous owners and was therefore, Saiwoo had informed her with the careful neutrality he applied to things he actually cared about, full of potential. She watched him in the garden on a Sunday morning through the kitchen window, a mug of coffee warming her hands. He was crouched over a raised bed in the corner, still wearing his dress trousers from the night before, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was doing something deliberate and gentle with the soil, turning it, testing it, the hands that had built a criminal empire and brought 3 men to their knees on a Saturday morning now working with the patient, specific attention of someone learning a new language. He had planted herbs along the south wall. He had asked her 3 times whether she thought the orchid would survive the window in the front room. He had built a ramp on the back porch, gradual and smooth, for her mother's wheelchair, and he had done it himself on a Tuesday afternoon without telling either of them until it was finished. Amina was inside now, still sleeping. She had her own room on the ground floor, the one with the good morning light, the one that had been chosen for no other reason, and the house had the particular Saturday morning quality of a place that was still learning it was a home. Saiwoo looked up from the garden. Found her in the window. Something in his expression shifted, not softened, exactly, but arrived, the way a man's face arrives when he has stopped expecting everything to be taken away. Evelyn raised her coffee mug. He raised 2 fingers from the soil. The old tell, the command, the gesture that had sent men through service doors, that had set this entire rearrangement of her life in motion from a restaurant table 40 stories above the city. But here, now, it was nothing more than a man in a garden saying good morning to the woman in his kitchen window. She went to put another cup on. Marcus was 4 states away and would not be returning. The building on 32 still stood, but someone else lived in it now. Jay was somewhere nearby, because Jay was always somewhere nearby, but the surveillance had become something different. Less fortress, more family, the kind of watchfulness that is indistinguishable from care. Her mother was getting better. The specialist called it remarkable. Evelyn called it Amina, who had always, in the end, decided to stay. And Saiwoo Park, Korean Mafia boss, keeper of a kingdom built on a grief he had finally begun to set down, came in from the garden with soil on his hands and his collar open, and he washed his hands at the sink beside her with the unhurried, unguarded ease of a man who had stopped performing and started living, and he accepted the coffee she handed him, and he looked at her the way he had looked at that monitor in the restaurant. Like she was something he would not look away from. Like he had already done the calculation. Like this, precisely this, was the outcome he'd been choosing all along. And that's where we leave them today, Saiwoo with soil on his hands and a woman who finally stopped running, in a house that learned to be a home. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button. It genuinely means the world and it tells me to keep going. If you're new here, subscribe so you never miss the next chapter, because trust me, this is only the beginning. Stay close. The next video is coming, and you do not want to be the last one to see what happens next. I'll see you there. Blackheart.